Ezra Ginsburg here from Hockey Manitoba. Pleased to be joined by Dene Guillas, co-founder of Braiding Colors Consulting. Dean, thank you so much for joining us.
No, thank you for inviting me.
And we just wanted to start off by allowing you to briefly introduce yourself.
Sure. So my name is Dene Guillas. I use he, they pronouns, and I'm the co-founder of Braiding Colors Consulting. I have a few identities I love to share with folks so that you know where my lived experience comes from. I am a two-spirit individual, which means I'm both Indigenous and part of the rainbow community. I am pan, which means I care more about people who they are on the inside than their outside packaging. And I am also transgender. So I was actually assigned female at birth, but that just did not work for me. So, yeah.
And we wanted to start off by talking to you about, in terms of hockey, how do you believe we have done so far in dealing with inclusion and representation?
Sure. I think I'd like to first start by giving a little background in my experience in hockey, just so that you folks kind of know where that comes from. So when I was a little girl, I actually started out playing ringette as a kid, because it was seen as the girls' sport. And since I was assigned female at birth, that felt like the path I was expected to follow because I love sports. I love getting active and getting out there, and it also helped me make friends. Um, but later, I actually did move into a co-ed hockey team and played as the goalie. But there was only two girls on the team at the time, and the rest were all boys. Unfortunately, the boys weren't very welcoming though, and it felt like we were constantly having to prove that we were good enough to be there. And so I then put a ton of pressure on myself to like outperform just to be seen. And I loved hockey. I loved ringette, but unfortunately, the stress of like constantly trying to overachieve, plus not really having a safe space at home to talk about my identity, really just made it unsustainable for me as a kid. So I ended up quitting, even though I really didn't want to. So here's the thing, like sports were actually one of the only places that I felt safe, or a sense of safety at least, or validation growing up. I was really good. Literally, at any sport I tried, I just excelled at it. So, when I scored a goal or made a basket, people would cheer for me. And that moment of praise, it literally just meant everything to me. And so, not getting a lot of encouragement in my childhood, I found myself like chasing that feeling anywhere I could. And I started joining literally any sport that was offered in schools, partly to keep getting praise, but also, if I'm honest, I also avoided wanting to go home because it didn't feel safe. So sport became an actual like lifeline for me. It was never just a game. It was a sense of survival. And one of the few places I would say I felt worth. And unfortunately, I know my story also isn't unique. We look at some of the research that's out there, and we're finding that almost half of our Canadian youth who come out to teammates do face bullying and harassment and assault. And that harm isn't just emotional, like it does push us out of sports altogether. So that's why creating these truly inclusive environments matter so deeply for me. I don't think no one should have to leave a game or feel unsafe in it to be their authentic selves. And so I would say with hockey culture, it still has a lot of unlearning to do, because traditionally I feel like it was built on things like silence or toughness or conformity. And those values do leave very little room for things like queerness or softness or difference. And people often point out, that we have things like, oh, the rainbow tape during Pride Month for hockey, or we post signs of progress, but sometimes surface level gestures aren't the same as, let's say, like a big structural change. But in fact, according to Hockey Canada, I think it was like 60% of all discrimination penalties in 2022 were due to sexual orientation or gender identity. And I think that tells us loud and clear, like the harm is still happening. It's not just in the past, like it is still here. But, we don't want to see just performances done during the month of June. We call that sometimes performative allyship, right? Where some organizations change their logo to like have a rainbow on it, but then when July 1st hits, the rainbow's gone and they don't have any policies, they don't have any um, procedures or any safe people that they can go to. Um, I think that even our non-binary kids and our trans kids are avoiding sports entirely just because they know it is so gendered. And even the ones that do join, I think like out of that number, only about 1 in 5 actually find support, somebody they can talk to and open up to and be honest about where they're at. So it's not a lack of like not wanting to play in sports, because a lot of times people say, "Oh, well, we don't see any queer people in sports." It's like, no, like we're either there and we're not safe enough to tell you that we're queer or part of the rainbow, or we're just not joining because we don't feel like if we did, we'd be seen or have a safe place. But there is some good things definitely happening. I know that Canadian Center for Ethics in Sports and Skate Canada have actually laid out inclusive frameworks that we can adapt in hockey. Things like gender identity, guiding participation, not the anatomy of a person, or having like documentation to prove it. And I think even Hockey Canada shifted some policy in Ontario back in, I think it was like 2014, that affirmed trans players' rights to actually use the facilities that match their gender and be respected for things like their names, their pronouns, and definitely their privacy. So there's definitely shifts and there's changes to the standards, but I think it's not something that needs to be siloed. Like we need to have this across the country, right? So everyone can access that.
And you just touched on it a little bit, but the next question I wanted to ask you was how specifically we can make hockey more inclusive for the T2S LGBTQI plus community.
Sure. A good job on that, the acronym. Yeah, so what can we do in hockey? I think inclusion has to be definitely intentional, but also ongoing, meaning like we need to make sure that we're not just saying we're allies, this is a safe place. We need to be constantly like evolving and evaluating how this is a safe space. What are we actually doing? Maybe getting the voice of some of our 2S LGBTQIA plus athletes and seeing what they have to say about the space. So simple things like policies, we can review our policies to make sure that the language used in them is very clear. I think we've been focused a lot on generic words and usage in policies like diversity, inclusion, equity, and those are great words, but sometimes those words aren't specific enough, right? So some people could say, "Oh, we're diverse because we have different color people on our team." And it's like, okay, well, that's one type of diversity, but there are many types of diversity. So I think it comes down to being more specific with our words and clearly saying, in this space, 2S LGBTQIA plus people are welcome. Dressing rooms are definitely a big factor when it comes to safety. I feel like there's still a very hyper masculine space, and that can be scary for a lot of folks because, like, even I think 80% of our non-binary Canadian athletes are reporting that the locker and change rooms are a reason they don't want to participate in the sport. Like, that's huge. Um, I think a big one for me, not just because this is the type of work that I do, but I think education is massive. And not just education on the like entry level. I think it has to be on all levels, upper management all the way down to the frontline workers and volunteers, participants, families, athletes, everyone. I think you don't know what you don't know. And so a lot of folks don't know that they might be able to do things that are more inclusive, or maybe that some of the things they're doing are not inclusive. But if you don't surround yourself with people who are educating on this or who are talking about this regularly, it's not going to be information that you learn. Because realistically, where do we learn, inclusion that we weren't taught when we were kids, when we're adults? There's not really a place to go to learn this. So we have to find opportunities to provide that type of education to folks. Um, Trauma informed as well, right? Knowing that people bring different traumas into their environments. And while it is a sport, I mean, sport is, like I said, for some of us, it's survival, it is life giving, it is a place that maybe just one person can see us for who we are, just a great athlete, not trans or not non-binary or not gay, right? So there's ways that we can make sure that people are informed through that trauma. And then I think the next piece when it comes to the education is also accountability. And what I mean by that is like we're all human beings. We're not going to get it perfect. We are going to make mistakes, and that's okay. That is actually part of becoming a better ally, becoming more inclusive. So that accountability piece is massive. If we do cause harm, we just need to acknowledge it, talk to it, and then make steps to change. Because I feel like sometimes we get locked in this place of fear where, oh, I don't know how to do it exactly right. So I'm just not going to make any change until I know how to do it exactly right. And the problem is there is no exactly right or perfect. There's this great quote by Maya Angelou that she says, do the best you can until you know better. And then when you know better, do better. And I feel like that's what we're talking about here. Like we are currently, I think, as a society realizing like, oh my gosh, I now know better. I know that some of the things we've been doing are not really good, but it's like what do I do next? And so we struggle with the what do I do next, but if we stand in the same place and we don't make any changes, we're not going to get to a better place. So it's about taking those steps forward and making small changes at a time. And then if that change doesn't fit everyone, then we say, I'm sorry, thank you for letting me know. And we make another change and another change. And we'll notice after 20 steps forward, sure, we made 19 mistakes, but we are literally 20 steps ahead of where we were. So that matters in regards to accountability. And it also means, I think, looking to leadership. Like, who is in the position of making decisions, right? Who is paid for their expertise? Who's at the table when we're actually talking about the future of the game and what it looks like? Is it just the same people over and over again with the same lived experiences, right? Or are we actually trying to hear the voices of those folks who we know are minoritized in our organizations? One example of action that I really appreciated was the Greater Toronto Hockey League, which is the world's largest minor hockey league, partnered with actually You Can Play, and they trained over 300 coaches, staff, and players. And they now offer proactive inclusion support instead of just reacting to incidents. And that's what we're looking for as commitments, right? Yes, bad things will happen and we have to react to them, but can we get on the other side where we're actually proactively trying to get ahead of those concerns and issues before it happens? Because we don't want to tokenize either. Inclusion doesn't mean tokenizing, oh, we have the one trans person and let's just use them to make all of our changes. Like we're actually looking at transforming it from a place of, no, as an organization, we acknowledge there are some gaps. And so we want to do it because not just for maybe this one trans athlete, but for anybody who enjoys the sport and wants to participate. You know, we want to make sure queer and trans people, if they are being brought to the table, like they're also compensated for that because that's emotional labor. Like whenever, like I've signed on with my wife to do this job, to run this company, to use our lived experiences to help better spaces and create those spaces, but not everybody does. Most people just want to exist, just want to live their lives and like play a sport that brings them joy. So we should be recognized as essential to building better systems and compensated accordingly. And in my work as an inclusion consultant with my wife and educating through our company, Braiding Colors Consulting, we get to support organizations and sport groups that are actually very serious about making these meaningful changes. And I have had the privilege of working with organizations like Sport Manitoba, the Winnipeg Youth Soccer Association, Manitoba Artistic Swimming, the university's Bachelor Physical Education program, the anti-racism in sports, and even a lot of the Manitoba Physical Education or associations. And that's been amazing because we've been able to help teams and organizations move beyond just awareness into action, whether that's through things like their policy reviews, professional development, or one-on-one consultation for those situations that do arise. We are trying to reshape how we show up in sport. And it is super encouraging to see more and more organizations opening the door for these, just even a conversation. And I'm always excited to work alongside groups who are doing this. So again, thank you so much for inviting us to the space.
Well, it's our pleasure. And in your answer earlier, you mentioned language, and that's what I wanted to ask you about next, because and this ties into leadership, which you talked about as well. When it comes to parents, coaches, administrators, I think we all know that discriminatory language is inappropriate, but it's also our job to make sure that we're not just allowing that type of language to exist, whether that's on the ice, whether that's on in the dressing room. In your opinion, in your experience, how do we make sure that we're doing a good enough job educating our parents and our coaches, and so that it trickles down to our players, and it's accepted that discriminatory language is not okay. Like how do we do that? How do we do a
Yeah.
better job of doing that?
Yeah, because I was gonna say I think we're definitely in the throes of trying. Like we have been making changes to language and creating those policies of, anti-bullying, discrimination, harassment. So I think again, having those policies be very clear, like because some people could say, oh, well, that's not discriminatory and give their own reasons why it's not. But if we are very clear that any language that addresses the 2S LGBTQ plus community, is transphobic, homophobic, or any of the phobics, then it gives less wiggle room or less gray area. So I think those policies for a lot of folks are kind of like the groundwork because at least they know that if anyone is ever upset with anything they say, they have a clear policy that protects them in saying, no, that was the wrong thing to do, or you're suspended because of that. Like they have the policy to protect their actions. So I think a clear policy will really be a very helpful thing to start off with. And then next is again understanding that the people at the top, they're also on board because everything always escalates, right? There's always the chain of command, and if somebody has an issue with something that somebody has done, it tends to rise that chain of command. So if the people at the top level of your organization are on board with what you are saying and are clearly educated and understanding, then it does not matter how high somebody escalates a concern or they want to argue the suspension. It does not matter. Like the person at the top will not give in. They'll will justify that no, what happened was inappropriate and against what we stand for, our morals, our vision statement, whatever it is. So yeah, so I think policies, the people at the top need to be educated, and then we can start talking about how we educate everyone else. So we can do that through offering workshops to folks, providing opportunities to do Q&A sessions, providing them maybe more resources that they can like physically go over through themselves. Because I feel like a lot of times for most people that I've run into, I try to give them the benefit of the doubt. When they are being homophobic or transphobic, I truly believe for most people, it's just they don't know what they don't know. So I like to provide the opportunity for them to share with me, why do you feel that way? What makes you think that? Where does that come from? Because that gives me an understanding of, do you actually know the harm you're causing or not? So I feel like through Q&A sessions, through resources, we can offer people opportunity to just take a pause and maybe just reflect on their feelings or their opinions, their beliefs, and where they come from. Because for a lot of us folks, like we just got taught the same, gender roles and expectations and society expectations that all of us were raised with. And the problem with that though is I think those roles and expectations need to evolve over time, right? We need to look at our society and realize that some of the things we did in the past may have helped us, but if we are to move forward in a good way, in a more inclusive space where everyone feels like they have the right to exist and just be a human, then maybe there are some things we need to leave in the past and we need to acknowledge that and then just move forward in better ways. And so the first step to that, though, is a lot of unlearning and relearning. And I've had to go through that in my existence as well. Being assigned female at birth, I had all these roles and expectations that were given to me about what it meant to be a girl. And I tried really hard to fit into those expectations because here's the thing, like nobody's going to wake up and choose to be discriminated. choose to be harassed. And I knew as a kid that I was different. And when you were different, people laughed at you or made fun of you. So I tried to fit into that box where I was put, but it just never felt right for me. It felt like I was playing a persona of a character that the world maybe would accept more than who I truly was. But when I did try to do the things that felt good for me as a kid, like play with boys' toys or wear boys' clothes, I was always met with such negativity, like, oh, you can't do that. Only little boys do that. Little girls don't do that. Be more ladylike. What's wrong with you? And when you're a kid, you don't understand what roles or expectations are. You just know what feels good and what doesn't. And so for me, the things that felt good being met with that kind of response, literally, I started to internalize the fact that maybe I was broken. Maybe there was something wrong with me. And if nobody could understand me, how was I even supposed to understand myself? And so I had to go on a journey of actually looking for ways to define myself, the words, the understandings, because for straight people, you don't have to go searching for what straight means. You see it everywhere. It's the expectation or the norm. For cisgender people, again, you don't have to go looking for a definition. That's everywhere. But for myself, I literally had to define myself, my existence through self-exploration, through research, through trial and error. And that's a really lonely existence for a lot of people to be in, especially as a kid, especially not to have anybody even talking about how I felt. I don't even think I heard the term transgender until I was late teens, early 20s. And so not having a word, not having a community felt super isolating. And so, yeah, I think education, we're not trying to educate people to convert people to making you rainbow. We just want language. We want connection. We want community to know we're not alone and we're not broken because there's nothing wrong with our existence. Two spirit people have been around long before any of the other alphabet has been created. We were celebrated. We were seen as valued and blessings to community prior to things like colonization and residential schools, right? But this is what I mean about I think education is our way forward. It's our way to help folks at least be more educated and informed. If you still want to make a decision after you've collected all of the information, then okay, then that means you want to exist in a place that I shouldn't be here. Can we at least engage where you can be on that side and I'll be on this side and we can just exist and we don't have to interact, right? We can be civil. We don't have to try to hurt each other, but we don't have to be best friends either or hold hands. And that's the kind of world I'm looking for here.
Dene Guillas is the co-founder of Braiding Colors Consulting. Dean, thank you so much for taking the time. This was a very important and educational chat, and we look forward to you working with our members in the future. So thank you so much, and happy Pride Month.
Thank you for having me.